Nice to see so many familiar faces here. I'm Leigha. I'm the head of product at FlutterFlow. Today I'm going to be talking a little bit about best practices in FlutterFlow. But before I get started, I'd love to know how many people have heard of FlutterFlow. Can you raise your hand? Okay, lots of people. That's great. And how many people have used FlutterFlow? Okay, cool. Nice. I like to see some people who have played around with FlutterFlow. So I am going to talk a little bit about best practices, but first I think it's good to set the stage and talk a little bit about our company mission and kind of where we're headed as a product. So at a company level, our goal is really to help the world build great products. And right now we're focusing on apps, so mobile apps, desktop apps, anything that you can build with Flutter, so web apps as well. And when we think of building apps, there are a lot of tools at your disposal, and they kind of sit on this spectrum. You have like really low-level APIs, and then this ranges all the way up to higher-level abstraction tools like design tools like Figma. And most low-code tools sit high on this abstraction level. So you're kind of working in this black box where you don't have a ton of control over what's going on. But maybe it's really easy to use and you can get started very quickly. So when it comes to FlutterFlow, we're actually trying to sit a bit lower on this abstraction level. So we really view ourselves less as a low-code tool and more as this visual development environment. So when you're using FlutterFlow, you still have pretty low-level control over things like widget properties, state management, refreshing of different builds within your app. And the goal is to give you the flexibility to create a really high quality app and not sacrifice on any features. So when we think about the architecture of the FlutterFlow platform, as a builder, you're working in the app itself, so app.flutterflow.io or in our desktop interface. And as you're interacting with this interface, you're adding widgets, you're configuring them, you're connecting to your backend. All along, FlutterFlow is saving this intermediary state of your app in this format called protobuf. And then we use that protobuf to go ahead and convert and generate Flutter code. So you end up with a repository of Flutter and Dart code. And it sounds like a lot of you have used FlutterFlow, so you've probably played around and maybe looked at the generated code already. So when it comes to our goal as a product, we're really trying to make sure that if you're a developer and you're using FlutterFlow, we're making you way faster, right? Our user base is split 50-50. We have non-technical people, and for them, FlutterFlow gives you superpowers. You can build things that you otherwise would not have been able to build. But if you're a developer, maybe you can write code, you can do this, you can open up VS Code and create a Flutter app. So our goal is to make sure that you're able to move way faster. And the key here is, again, we don't want you to make sacrifices. So sacrificing on app quality or your features. And our goal is also to make sure that if you're following best practices in FlutterFlow, that the generated code should also follow Flutter and Dart best practices. And I put this little purple asterisk because best practices are sometimes highly debated, especially in the Flutter world. So we're really focusing on best practices that are going to create tangible differences in your end user's experience when using your app. And of course, one of my favorite parts about FlutterFlow is that you can export your code whenever you want. So you own your IP, and if you feel like you're stuck, you can of course drop down to the code layer through custom widgets or custom functions, but you can also just export the code and run with it outside of the application. So that's a little bit about FlutterFlow as a company and our product vision, but now I want to talk a little bit about best practices. So my goal for this talk is to just go through a couple of tips that I have, and I want to talk a little bit about our philosophy and how to use the product as I'm sharing those tips. And when I think about best practices, I'm really focused on two outcomes. The first one is best practices that help create a great user experience for the end users of your app. And the other one is to just support faster iteration from your team. So to make your or your team's life easier when you're building your app. Okay, so my first tip is to leverage components. And if you haven't spent much time in FlutterFlow, maybe you don't know what a component is, so I'm going to walk through that in just a second. But first, it's helpful to tie resources in FlutterFlow back to how things would work if you're writing a Flutter app by hand. So in Flutter, we know that everything is a widget, right? Widgets all the way down. And if I tie these back to more conceptual objects, we have at the root a widget that represents your entire app. So in this case, my app. And then that widget goes ahead and builds different screens or pages, right? So these are, again, widgets. And then those build other widgets, right? They have columns, they have different layout widgets, they have atomic widgets like text or buttons. And they use all of these together to create this app, again, using all widgets. And the properties of these widgets are maybe configured dynamically through different functions or expressions. And they're also configured through different like themes or style constants that you've set up in your app. So beyond kind of these like built-in widgets or maybe custom widgets that you create for your app or your pages, you might also create brand new widget classes in your code base. So think about like a custom button, for example. So if I think about how this relates to resources that you see in FlutterFlow, instead of creating a widget for an app, you just create a new project in FlutterFlow. And instead of creating a widget for a page, you create a page. Then you have all these built-in widgets like the same layout or atomic widgets that you would get in the framework that you can then add to your page. And of course, we have design systems where you can set up your themes or style constants. And this is where components come into play. So I can create custom widget classes either by defining a custom widget in code or by creating a component in the UI. So when I said my tip is to use components, I'm really talking about this bit right here. So I'll try to breeze through this since it sounds like a lot of people have used FlutterFlow already. But in FlutterFlow, I can add a page, and the page is going to have its own widget tree, and each one of those widgets can be configured on the right-hand side. I'm allowed to add different widgets to that widget tree, so I can just add directly and select different widget classes. So those would be different built-in widgets or any components that I've created or imported into my project. And if I peek open the generated code, I can see that I have this separation of my UI layer and my data model layer. So before I was talking a little bit about what it means to have different layers of abstraction. And of course, our goal is to try to take care of things that are somewhat annoying or that you don't want to have to set up on your own. So when I create a page in FlutterFlow, the generated code is actually going to have a lot of stuff going on that I didn't have to worry about. So pages are automatically going to have a scaffold at the root of it, and they're going to have routing that's configured through GoRouter. And sometimes you see like bits of code, a big piece of feedback that I hear from developers is there's a lot of code going on, and I'm not sure like where all this code is coming from and why it's necessary. And that right-hand side, the properties panel, it has all these different settings, and a lot of those settings translate to different bits of generated code. This is one example of a setting that's turned on by default, but it's basically to kind of dismiss the keyboard when you tap on a page. And it's kind of a natural interaction that you would expect when using an app, but Flutter doesn't do it by default, so we've just added this bit for you. You'll also notice lots of out-of-the-box widgets coming straight from the framework. And occasionally you'll see FF or FlutterFlow widgets that are basically usually wrappers around the material widget, or custom widgets that we've created because maybe the material ones were too like opinionated or it's hard to bring your own design system to life by using these widgets. And of course, you can reference your theme when you're setting properties in the FlutterFlow UI, and that just translates to using this FlutterFlow theme class that's generated for you. Okay, so I tried to breeze by that pretty quickly because I want to talk more about components. So again, my goal is to convince you to use components because components will help create or help you use those same principles of encapsulation and reusability that you would want to have when writing code. So a component is again just my own widget class, and from the widget tree in the page selector, I can just go ahead and click that diamond button on the right-hand side to create a custom component. And now I can leverage this component anywhere where I want to use it throughout my app. So the example I just showed was actually creating a list card to represent my product in this e-commerce page. And you can see I'm using it in a couple of different places. I'm using it in 2 different list views that are dynamically generated. And when I create these components, I can also create different input parameters, just like if I was writing this class by hand. Right, so in my case, I have some input parameters like the product that this page or that this card represents. And of course, at any time, I can pop open the generated code and I just see that this is its own widget class with its own parameters based on how I set it up in the UI. Cool. So beyond just creating parameters, within components, I still have my widget tree, just like if I'm working in a page, and I still set the configuration of that widget on this right-hand side panel. Now, these can be set to theme constants, like I mentioned before, or just like literal values, like strings or numbers, but they can also be dynamically generated. So you can configure them or connect them to a different variable. So in this case, I'm connecting it to my isFavorite parameter. So I'm passing in a parameter that tells if this was favorited by my user. And then I have this conditional builder that says, okay, if it is favorite, show this icon that's maybe colored in. So a colored in heart icon. If it's not, then just leave an outline icon. And FlutterFlow has pretty robust state management. So you have a couple of different options for managing state. You can have state variables that live at the app layer so that they're shared across all different pages and widgets. You can have state variables at the page level, or you can have the component manage its own state. So I could also create like an isFavorite state variable that's maybe updated when a user clicks on that icon to add that product to its favorites. So that was a little bit about components, and I want to talk about the benefits of using components. So first off, using components really impacts performance. The way it impacts performance is it's first going to reduce the build cost because we're separating things that would happen in that page's build method and we're putting them out into its own class. So again, a lot of the feedback I hear from developers when they look at generated code from FlutterFlow is there's a lot of code, but you have a lot of control over that through setting different properties that are on the right-hand side panel and intelligently parsing out different parts of that widget tree into their own classes. This also reduces rebuilds, right? If your widget or your component manages its own state, then you don't have to rebuild your entire page when that state changes. You're only rebuilding the class itself. And of course, this is also a benefit for your end users because you have a more consistent user experience. You can create components out of all different types of widgets, so you can create more atomic, granular pieces of your design system as components, or like larger molecule type elements. And this is also beneficial for app builders, right? We have modularity, which just eliminates the need to build out like redundancy. So I'm not creating the same styles over and over again, or the same shadows, or using the same theme elements. And I can also create clear boundaries. So this way, if I see an issue with my button, I know exactly where to go to try to fix that issue. And of course, there's isolation. So I can be working on some components and I don't have to worry about affecting you because you're working on a totally different component. And components have been in FlutterFlow for a little bit, but we've been continuing to make improvements. So one cool thing that we recently launched was the ability to have recursive components. So one component can use itself in its own widget tree. And we have this cool demo of like a Reddit clone in case you wanted to test it out for yourself. We also are working on lots of other features for components right now. So we're working on adding metadata to components to make it easier to discover or use components and know how to use them and where they should be used. We're adding the ability to make any widget property dynamic. So if you've used FlutterFlow extensively, you probably recognize the like orange little handles to bind variables, right? I'm looking at this front row here because I know you all use FlutterFlow a lot. And right now that's only on some properties. So we're making every property able to be bound to a variable. We're also working on the ability to pass widget builders in as parameters. So this is really helpful for if I want to create like a custom drop-down button and I want a drop-down item to be passed in as a widget. And we're also working on lots of features to make it easy to share components and use them across different projects. So publishing design systems to the marketplace and being able to install them and import them into your projects as dependencies. Cool. So that was my tip number 1. Now my tip number 2 is to be thoughtful about fetching data. So when we think about fetching data in a FlutterFlow project, there are kind of 3 categories of ways that I can connect to a backend. So at the bottom, I have different databases, and we have direct integrations with lots of databases like Firestore, Supabase, SQLite, and Postgres. We also have integrations with SaaS tools. So we have like LLMs like Gemini, or we have like payment providers like RevenueCat and Stripe. And we also have the ability to just connect to any HTTP endpoint. So I'll show this in just a minute. Basically, this is the part I'm going to be focusing on because it's the most flexible. So inside of FlutterFlow, I can configure an API call. So we have this section in the left-hand side rail where I go and I can define an API call. I can specify my URL, any headers, query parameters, and these can be static, or again, they can be bound to a variable so that they're dynamic. I also have this nice kind of Postman-like interface where I can just test the request right there and see what it looks like, and even cast that as a data type, which is essentially just like a struct class in Dart that we generate for you based on the JSON schema of the response. And if you look at the generated code once you configure an API call, you'll see a couple different helper classes that we're using behind the scenes. So we have one that represents like an API call in general. We have one that just makes the responses of an API call easy to consume. And then we have one that manages request creation, execution, and the response handling. And then I have a class that represents the actual API that I've configured. So in this e-commerce app, I've created an endpoint to get a list of my products, so like my trending products for the day. And this class will just represent the things that I've configured on that screen that I showed before. So when it comes to actually executing an API call in FlutterFlow, we use something called an action. And you can think about an action as just a function or an expression that's going to execute in response to some trigger. And the nice thing about actions, and a lot of things in FlutterFlow actually, is that you can create action flows using the UI, or you can create a custom action using Dart code. So this is what it looks like to create an action flow at the page level. So at the top, I have that trigger. And in this case, I'm saying I want my action to run once my page has loaded. Then I can add different nodes into this graph. And there's lots of options. There are actual functions and expressions that you can run. And there are also kind of like helper nodes, like run something in parallel, run a conditional statement, run a loop, all that kind of stuff. So in this case, I am just writing a node or using a node that makes that API call that I created before. And when I configure that, I can also pass in any input parameters. Then I've added this conditional statement, and this conditional statement just checks to see if the previous API call was successful. And if it's successful, then I'm going to parse the response and I'm going to use this new data type that I've created. Otherwise, I'm going to set some state variable has query error, and I can set that to like a Boolean, or I can even set that to the error code that comes back from my API. And then finally, I have this is loading state that's set to true when the component is first created, but then I can set it to false once everything else has executed. And if I popped open the generated code, you'd see something like this, right? I have my page widget because I've tied this action to the page, and you can see like the trigger that, or the callback that represents the trigger that I selected, the actual API call itself, so that first node, and then this if-else statement, which represents that conditional that I created. Okay, so that was a little bit about API calls, but now on to my actual tips for how to handle fetching data in FlutterFlow. First of all, we want to let a user know when something is loading, right? We need some visual indicator. So this GIF is kind of low quality, don't mind the pixelation, but a common thing that people do in apps is have some like shimmer type of animation that shows when a widget or something is loading from a backend call. So here I'm just going to use my nifty conditional builder once again to say that if it's loading, I'm going to show this like shimmer container, which in FlutterFlow, I just created a component that's like a gray container with some curved radius that has a shimmer animation applied to it. And our animations, most of them use the Flutter Animate package under the hood, in case you were wondering. So I'm going to show that shimmer container if my widget is loading, but if it's fully loaded, then I'm just going to show this product list card, and this little play icon indicates that I've added an animation here too. It's just going to fade in so it looks a little bit nicer. So that was showing that something is loading and telling the user that something is loading. But we also want to handle errors gracefully. So this is where being able to grab that error code or just set the error state in your component state comes in really handy. Then again, I can conditionally build at the page or the component level and show some nice error message instead of getting some like scary red and yellow box. Okay, so my next tip when it comes to fetching data is to leverage caching. And this is, again, one of the benefits of using something like FlutterFlow that's just a slight level abstraction over Flutter. Right, so now I just have this toggle and I say cache results, and those API helper classes that I was showing before, they already have the logic in place to say, hey, if the toggle is set to true, then I know I need to be caching the results. And every time I make an API call, I'm checking to see if this same exact call with these same exact parameters have been made. And we also offer some actually more robust caching on the database side. So you have the ability to like set a unique key and set a refresh schedule and all that kind of stuff. So the benefits of being thoughtful about data fetching, these are all focused on our end user's experience, really. We're going to improve performance by caching. We're going to leverage some patterns to show the user that something is loading so they're not confused or think it's a bug. And we're also going to ensure proper error handling so they don't get some really ugly, bad experience if there's an error. And once again, there's a lot of stuff that we've been working on when it comes to fetching data in FlutterFlow. We recently launched this ability to create those data types that I was mentioning before from a JSON response. And we're also right now working on streaming APIs. So this is great for integrating with like LLMs that all send their data out in chunks. We've also been working on being more prescriptive about the types of variables that we're watching to improve performance. So this means we're like modularizing our app state, which right now is kind of in this monolithic class. We're breaking it down and we're only watching variables that your widget needs to improve that performance. We're also adding a bunch of additional action triggers so that you have more flexibility over when you want to call an action and how you want to respond to different events that are happening in your app's lifecycle. Cool. Okay, my last tip is pretty quick. I know we're starting to run short on time, but this is focused more on the developer workflow, and this has to do with branching. So branching in FlutterFlow is something that we launched maybe last year, but haven't really put a ton of effort into it. And right now we've made a lot of improvements. So if you've tried FlutterFlow in the past and maybe tested out branching, I think now's a good time to give it another try because we've been adding lots of new features. So in FlutterFlow, I can create a new branch, I can close a branch, I can merge branches into main, and soon you'll be able to merge across other branches. And we recently launched the ability to create a commit. So you just give your commit a name and you see it available in the branch history. But one of the benefits of using a visual development environment is I get these great features like being able to quickly see the state of my project at a certain commit, easily right-click to revert my project to that commit, or even see like a visual diff of what has changed at that commit. So this gives you, in my opinion, kind of a nicer experience rather than working in just like the branching panel in VS Code. So there are a couple of main benefits to branching. Most of you are developers, so I probably don't need to tell you this, but branching allows you to work in an isolated environment, which means I can test things out without affecting, the main version of my project. And I also can work in parallel with other people on my team, so we can work independently and don't have to worry about getting in each other's way or messing anything up. And like I said, we've been doing a lot of work on branching, but we're still adding some more features. So we're working on just like some general performance and UX improvements. We're also adding merging across different branches, and we're adding branch level access control. So this will allow you to do things like protect the main branch or choose who can merge or edit certain branches. So anyway, those were my tips for FlutterFlow. Hopefully this was helpful. But a couple of things I wanted to shout out. First of all, we have some folks from the FlutterFlow team who are down at the booth on the first level if you want to come say hi or win some prizes. We also, of course, FlutterFlow has a free version, and you can also sign up for a free trial if you want to give it a shot. And we are having our annual developer conference in September. It's the same week as FlutterCon in New York, just a couple days before, also based in New York. And we're planning to have lots of awesome product announcements. So it'll be a great thing to tune into either in person or online. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.